Hello and welcome to Syked Sound, the soundboard for conversations that matter. This is a space where we dig deep into the topics that affect mental health, wellness, and everything in between. Today we are having an incredibly important conversation as it is World Maternal Mental Health Day. And we'll be joined by our licensed therapist, humour, who will be talking about the challenges of pre- and postnatal depression, how to recognize it, and how we can better support those who are going through it. To help us with this conversation, we are joined by someone whose expertise and insight we are so grateful for, our very own Lusanda Sebekulu. Lusanda is a clinical psychologist and the COO of Syked, and today she is going to help us unpack everything we need to know about maternal mental health.
Hello everyone, I am Kuma and welcome to Syked Sound. Today we'll be talking a little bit about maternal mental health, just to have a gist on how postnatal and prenatal mental health affects women and what comes in with the struggles that women face during this period. So I have here Lusanda. Thank you for joining us. So normally we have this idea of how a new birth or a child coming or expecting a child can bring such joy. We think about celebrations, we think about baby names, we think about baby showers basically, but it's not something that we talk about when it comes to the difficulties, which is depression, which is the overwhelm, the anxiety of bringing in a child, because we have this perception, or it's known that we should have this perception of being happy because, a child gives life. It's a new life. A child is a gift, basically. But we have come to understand that maternal mental health is really important. It affects women differently. And one of those things is that people experience a lot of depression. People experience a lot of emotions and overwhelm or anxiety into that space.
Hi, Kuma.
Hello.
Thank you for inviting me, to this discussion, a very important one, because as you rightfully said, society would have us believe that pregnancy is meant to be a time of joy. It is supposed to be, in inverted commas, a time where families are jubilant, mothers are excited, all throughout the pregnancy up until one gets to give birth. But like you rightfully said, the reality sometimes is different. And that is really attributed to quite a number of factors. There are definitely women who would be excited about getting pregnant, having a baby, getting excited once baby is born and bonding with baby. And then there's the other proportion of women that we rarely hear about. And those are the women that will struggle with what would be antenatal depression during the pregnancy. And then there are those women who will struggle with postnatal depression, meaning that they get depressed after baby is born.
So how does one differentiate between the two? I understand that you said prenatal is, before having the baby or when the person is pregnant, and then post is after the depression. But how do I know if ever I am in this situation or I am experiencing this, depression or these overwhelming feelings, if I may?
Okay. So one would experience what would be a multitude of, emotions. I'll give you a couple. So if we look at what would be prenatal depression, whilst we recognize that women go through hormonal changes, which will likely impact their mood, that is expected, that is normal. However, what we will see with someone who is developing or who already has what would be prenatal depression is an expectant mother who's always sad, an expectant mother who's always, let's say, crying, continuously feeling guilty, sits with feelings of regret, sometimes does not even want to talk about the pregnancy, whilst they are pregnant, whilst they are taking what would be the necessary steps in terms of taking care of their health, but emotionally they're just not coping. It's the mom who would find themselves not looking forward to the day that they're supposed to have the baby. It would be the mom who sometimes you'd find that while some expectant mothers would go and, do certain preparations for the arrival of the baby. We've got someone who's not buying new clothes, not because they can't afford to, but because they can't quite see themselves on the other side.
The excitement is not there.
It's not there, Kuma. It's just not there. And so when people want to talk about the baby, they really get upset,
Okay. So with these mothers, is it because maybe they didn't plan for the pregnancy, or is it something that they were looking forward into, but then, being pregnant just gives a whole different meaning or a whole different experience on itself? Because I'm thinking that, when a person is pregnant, and also, not to get political, but we do have, options of not conceiving or not having a baby, which is terminating. But then, we have these experiences where people are now, not feeling like it. So is that the reason? Because they didn't want to, or now they regret it because they're in the whole process of being pregnant?
So the reasons would, differ from one individual to the next.
Yes.
I'll give you a couple of things. So you may have an expectant mother who may have already had depression in the past.
Okay.
Because remember, when we speak about depression, we speak about various factors that would actually contribute to a person having those kinds of emotions. So it may be pre-existing condition. It may be environmental factors.
Okay.
So yes, we have got a mother who may have wanted to have the baby, but they're in a relationship where things are really, really tough. Sometimes it may, like you implied, it may be the financial concerns. It may be other environmental factors such as, yes, I wanted to have a baby, but I fell pregnant at a time when I'm already going through other dynamics, such as I've just started a new job. And so I now start to see this pregnancy as almost going to be somewhat of a hindrance, a hurdle to what would be my career trajectory. So a big part of it is it's quite individualized. The reasons will differ. And then for somebody else, it might be other health concerns that a person may not necessarily have had the time to be dealing with. And so they are now seeing that pregnancy through the lens of everything else that is happening in their ecosystem. And as such, that then, tends to be somewhat of a hindrance to that bonding, with the baby.
And that must be, really difficult, because I can imagine as a mom who's expecting a child, and then you have, these feelings, this overwhelming responsibility, and then regretting or feeling guilty for even having those things, and it can be really devastating as well, to just be a person who's just struggling with that, not being able to speak about that, because people or society will look you differently, because what do you mean? What do you mean you feeling sad? What do you mean you don't want to have the baby now? What do you mean you are putting your profession or your career first, and now you just feel like, okay, I can't speak about this. So what kind of, not necessarily advice, but what kind of thoughts do you think those people are feeling at that moment, besides what I've mentioned, but in a sense of having to be regretful, but also wanting something, but also feeling guilty for having these kind of feelings? It's like a push and pull kind of thing situation.
Definitely. Let me just take it back a bit with Kuma. It starts with, let alone labeling what you're feeling, it's just about firstly recognizing that I'm not okay. Because when we speak the language of what would be emotions, when we speak about depression, the first dynamic or the first challenge starts in a person not being able to identify what is it that they are feeling. And so then confusion becomes the first thing. And once confusion enters the picture, we're going to have anxiety, because number one, I don't even understand how I'm feeling. And then as like you said, there's then the what am I doing right? And besides, I am a woman, as again society would have us believe, and I have a responsibility. I should be, because maybe we're speaking about a young mom here who just recently got married. So now it means there are
expected.
Yes.
Yes.
And now there's needs.
Yes.
You know, there is the personal needs that must now be merged with what would be the family needs, you know, with what would be the societal expectations. So already with just that, you then get that push and pull that you speak about, where it's a thing of, I want to, but, you know, and then a person starts to feel that sense of guilt that I spoke about, you know, feeling guilty that I feel this way when I should be feeling this way. And so they then also start to question themselves, and they then even start to question, let's call it their role as women, their role as wives if they are married, you know, wondering what kind of a woman am I if I don't have the natural inclination to just want to bond with the concept of having a baby, or the fact that I'm now pregnant and I'm excited. Because remember, as individuals, we live lives that have got multiple responsibilities. And as you know, social media also now places a lot of emphasis on the self. So here you are thinking of you, the self, and here are the other needs. So that's where the confusion then gets to actually come in.
And I do think social media does play a part, not necessarily negative, but I think as women we've tried to at least emphasize on taking care of ourselves, because that's not what we have been taught. That's not what society expects of us. And this comes in a question of, as a young professional myself, and then I find out I'm pregnant, and you know, I've been told, or I've been hearing people saying you should always choose yourself. But then you just started a new job, right? Or you are just getting new employment, but then you find out that you're also pregnant. And then you want not to miss this opportunity, but you also want this baby. And now you're going into a profession where you have to tell your boss, you have to disclose the fact that you are pregnant. So yes, social media is a good way of us understanding some things that we're not aware of, but it can also take us back on the fact that, oh, I didn't choose myself, or I shouldn't be choosing myself, you know, that kind of thing. So what I'm trying to get into, you know, the role or the sense of being this young professional who just got a job or has just finished university or college or whatever, and then they just found out that they're pregnant. What happens? You know, what do they do? Do they disclose? Do they not disclose? Should they terminate? Should they not terminate? Are they supposed to feel guilty? You know, getting into that space.
You know, you're right. Let's look at this persona of this young woman who's just recently gotten the job of their dreams. Let's just also maybe say it's in a male-dominated kind of industry. And so already we've got a female going into this role with the sense that they continuously need to step up. They need to continuously prove that they can,
They're worthy.
you know, and that they're competent. And they can put in the work, they can put in the extra hours, if extra hours is what the role actually requires, right, or demands. And so we now have this individual who has now fallen pregnant. They've just recently started. So yes, when you speak about then this sense of, you know, frustration about what do I do, for anyone, you know, just listening to us and thinking, oh my goodness, that was me. At some point, I contemplated maybe having a termination. We can definitely understand, because we are now talking about what would be multiple needs that are now competing here. So what does one do? The first thing is you need to understand that, you know, legally one is allowed, you know, is entitled rather to what would be maternity leave and the likes. So yes, one can go and communicate, but I do recognize the difficulty that may pose, you know, as to how to communicate. You just started, and then, but think about this, Tuma. A big part of it is perceptions. Because what you and I are talking about is a scenario here of someone already just thinking and feeling without having tested the waters. So one firstly needs to recognize that it's their internal voice that has this fear. So that may not necessarily be a true reflection of how they're going to be received. Because I mean, at the time we're in right now, workplaces have evolved so much so that the support is meant to be there. But I also do want to not be oblivious to the fact that sometimes some individuals may work with let's call it maybe bosses, managers who are not so sensitive.
Yes.
But one has got to recognize that that is something that they're entitled to, meaning that maternity leave. So yes, one can go and communicate. One can go to HR, firstly, and just find out what the policies are that actually govern, what maternity leave may look like. Yes, there are expectations, etc. And those are things that can be clearly communicated so that one gets to understand, okay, so in my absence, what does this mean? What is the impact going to be, etc. But at the end of it all, do not allow what would be your fears to then delay you from communicating certain things. Because yes, businesses and, from an operational perspective, one has to communicate because certain, let's call it, arrangements need to be made. So in as much as one has that fear, one still needs to work through that. And that is where therapy actually comes in, because then you get a chance to even understand why you have this fear. Because you may even find that it's really just based on your own internal fears and is not even a reflection of what's happening at your workplace.
Because sometimes our brains do tell us many things. They will literally make you feel like the little thing is as big as a mountain or big as an iceberg.
100%.
But what you spoke about when it comes to communication, it's really exactly that. You need to communicate that you have this difficulty, well, not even a difficulty, but this challenge, and you want, negotiate with your bosses, with your managers that, okay, there's this something that is happening now. I'm pregnant, and I just want to understand how I can, be responsible in terms of being at work, but also play my role within with the job title.
100%. It's actually not even a challenge. It's just a change
Okay.
that one needs to navigate and communicate as a matter of interest, Kuma. And as one gets to communicate it, that's important, because remember, there's also antenatal care that comes with a pregnancy. So meaning you are likely to be needing to negotiate for time away from work, be it an hour or two, because you're attending your doctor appointments, your clinic appointments, from an antenatal point of view. So it's important that there's that transparency. Hence, I spoke about HR, because HR gets you to understand, what your leave policy looks like, so that you're able to effectively plan beforehand. Because another thing that gets us to be overwhelmed at times is because we don't have the information. And like you said, our minds can sometimes play tricks on us, where we then build these mountains out of what would be things, little things, that can just be communicated and handled accordingly. But I do also want to mention that for anyone who has that kind of fear, we can never minimize it. We do understand that it is a product of something, be it their own experience or be it an experience that they've seen in the organization, etc. And so, yes, these are the dynamics that sometimes will even discourage certain individuals from even contemplating having a baby, just because, I've just started a career, etc.
Because I think it is also something that a lot of young people or people that are in, females actually that are actually at work. If I am to take a general worker, right? They know that they're a general worker, but they also have, personal goals. They want to have children at this age and whatever. And sometimes they will feel like they shouldn't, because there's like an expected goal from society. There's an expected way to like maneuver life itself. So it gets you to a point whereby you feel like you are caged. You can't really do anything. But then let's move into the postnatal, the aftermath, because I hear a lot of people, even our colleagues, when they speak about how terrifying giving birth is on itself. And there's also like stats that can, tell you that it's the most severe pain, excruciating pain, right? Let's say, for instance, we have a female, right, that is, or that has just given birth, but they cannot bond with the baby. What is it that we can look for? Not in a sense of we're trying to pinpoint who got pregnant and who, might be feeling this way, but for a husband, for a boyfriend, for a person whose partner just gave birth, what are some of the things that we should be noting, or the changes, if I may, from this person that just gave birth? Yeah.
So you spoke about what is the pain, the pain of childbirth. It's a reality for some individuals for different reasons.
Yeah.
Sometimes during pregnancy, there may be certain complications, because I want to take you back as to how we even get to an individual who starts to develop those feelings after giving birth.
Okay.
Because let's say, hypothetically, we have a mother who during their pregnancy, everything was going well, but after they give birth, then the dynamic gets to change.
Yeah.
So the pain that you spoke about sometimes, so meaning the complications that may have occurred during childbirth, can be so traumatic, so much so that the mom sits with the internal trauma, but because again it's normal, and they should, in inverted commas, be grateful for the fact that baby is well. So no one gets to take time to allow them to process their experience of childbirth. So even just that on its own, Kuma, can lead to one developing what would be feelings of postnatal depression. It can be stuff that has happened before, stuff that happens during, or another dynamic that we often will underplay is that of one's own childhood traumas. Finding meaning when one now has a baby, because one starts to question if they'll be able to take care of this young person. Because now here's the reality. During pregnancy, all what one had to do was take care of themselves. And so now once baby is back home, is a physical person, a physical being that you must now take care of. Family was there supporting you, partner goes back to work. And so you're sitting throughout the day with this young person who does not communicate verbally, but communicates through many other actions. And so
tantrums and all.
It's the crying, it's a whole lot of things. And you now have to try and make meaning and understand what is going on. Again comes now the helplessness of, okay, what does this mean? What do I do? And you've got a child maybe who struggles to sleep at night, and one does their best. Again, they struggle. That's where the feelings also may come in. So what does a partner look out for? What does a partner do? Let me give you let's call it the common signs that we're going to see. We're going to have a mom who's continuously sad. We're going to have a mom who's continuously hopeless, feels helpless, and communicates it. You look at how mom maybe even neglects their self-care. And I know that as I say this, many moms would say, but Lusanda, let me tell you, when you've got a young baby, there's no chance to self-care. And I recognize I am a mother myself, so I've been there. But the kind of self-care that I speak about just really is about just the basic things, just the basic of things, just basic grooming. And you find that mom is no longer taking care of themselves, or they're not even taking care of the baby. Or when the baby cries, they just don't have an inclination to even go to the baby. So for a partner, for a family member, as a mother, and you're looking at your daughter, your young daughter who's just had a child themselves, and you're noticing these things, those become, let's call it, telltale signs that the mother, the new mother, is going through emotional difficulties or psychological difficulties. And that is where, families can then step in, partners can then step in, and just check how mom is doing. But besides just checking, negotiating with mom on how to also support, in collaboratively taking care of the baby.
I think there are, some people that don't have partners, that only just have friends. And those friends may just come in, maybe 2 days or 2 weeks after, and mom is just battling with the child who might be crying, and they aren't inclined to the child. And they might feel isolated themselves because, like we said earlier on, there's these expectations where they cannot be or be what they feel, right? Where maybe they will feel like, they're not supposed to feel this way, but they can't even, talk about it. Let's also talk about, the mom that might not even have parents, they might have, siblings or whatever, but they're not close to them. What is it that you might, or what is it that you think we might be going through, or they might be going through rather, or how the other friends or the people that are in that person's life might do?
Support. What is important to always recognize as human beings is that we've got biological families.
Okay.
And then we've got families and communities of loved ones that we develop ourselves by way of neighbors, by way of friends. So sometimes we may not necessarily have, the partner or one's own mother, being present, an elderly female, because usually,
the elders.
Yes, there's got to be an elder,
Yes,
who comes in to help new mom take care of baby. Sometimes one doesn't necessarily have that, but one can establish their own community, their own family of loved ones, regardless of what the reasons are. So like I said, it's the friends, it's the neighbors. By the way, there's also now what would be virtual support groups. Do you know that there's many groups that exist currently, social media, etc., where moms just go in and they create WhatsApp groups, online groups where they talk about their experiences, they talk about questions, they ask one another questions. So you find that mom is struggling with baby who's not sleeping. When they get onto social media, onto that platform or that group that they're a part of, they get to ask other mothers that they may not necessarily even have personal relationships with, but it's individuals who understand their experience. And that feels more comforting because you're speaking to someone who's also going to say, I did not sleep last night, but this is what I tried and it helped. So there is numerous resources that people can tap into. Church, for example, some go to church. And I know, I speak about church, many may be even thinking, oh, Lusanda, you don't know the stigma sometimes because moms are supposed to sit at the back because babies are making noise, etc. But again, there are still other individuals there that you can tap into, that would be available to be a source of support. So just know, Tuma, that when we speak support, we're not only talking about physical support.
Yes.
We speak about emotional support. We speak about psychological support. It's when you go to the clinic, when you go to the doctor, you go to the nurse. Those people, those spaces.
Important support system.
So resources can look anyway, as long as they have the impact that you want.
And it's quite difficult, when you think about just bringing yourself to that vulnerability or even knocking that, I actually need help. Maybe you do recognize it, but you might not be willing to admit it, because you're supposed to be a stoic woman. You're supposed to know it all. You're supposed to have this nurturing sense of being because you're a woman. It's supposed to be natural, but to some people it's not. So it's very difficult to even be a woman who is experiencing that, but also does not have the support that they need or that should be there. Another thing that I wanted to, mention is being in a workplace where you are, supposed to be on maternity leave, but then maybe the child is giving, struggles and all, and then your colleagues might say you've been absent for a while and now you feel guilty because it is true, but then you also have a little one that you want to take care of, or maybe you are working as a general worker or a blue collar worker where you have to carry a heavy stuff or machinery just after giving birth. Maybe you're not healed enough, and then there will be talks of unfairness, of favorism within the workspace, that, oh, why is he not, but our contracts are the same, so why am I expected to be okay for a female that is not my wife or that is not my girlfriend, who just gave birth? Some people may have that. I'm not saying everyone, but they might have it unconsciously that, oh, I'm having to carry all of this now. Where does, or how does work or management deal with that?
So what you're talking about, Kuma, here is biases.
Okay.
And there's an unfortunate reality that we live in, and that is we can never ever control what other people are going to think.
Yeah.
And it's important that one gets to be at peace with that, just in general. Because once we get to the workplace, remember, we work with different people. So even I, as a female, could work with you, and I feel the unfairness of the fact that you've been away from work for 4 months or 3 months, just as a start. So it even starts when you come back and you're trying to, get feedback about what has been happening, and you've got someone with resistance. It's their own personal biases that are beyond you. Hence, then, the importance of where we started off, with the conversation where, as you fall pregnant and as you plan to communicate with your business, speak to HR, understand what is available to you, what concessions can be made if a need arises. Speak to your health practitioners, because as you're making the example of someone who works in an industry where it's physical labor. And at that point in time, perhaps they're still struggling, health-wise. That's where your health practitioner needs to come in, because they then will motivate for you. And you go back to HR and communicate exactly that, right? And I do also want to be sensitive to the fact that there still are what would be operational and business needs that will always remain paramount because of our roles. But I mean, if you've got a health practitioner who's motivating that, this person still needs a month or so to recover, one can negotiate with the business, through HR, because that's what HR is there for,
Some of us are afraid of HR, hey?
I
Because
know.
there is a stigma, I don't want to lie, there is a stigma, as we are talking about stigma, of going to HR and telling them your business. That's the first thing. You are being vulnerable by telling them your business.
Right.
Secondly, you have this perception that you would want to be in when it comes to work. You have to be professional. So because you've laid out your business, it already feels like you're not professional. But we are of the mind, or we are of the perception that, HR is here to just kill us, get another person to come join the company and all of that. So with those biases, how am I comfortable, or how should I be comfortable in just
That's the thing. What you find is that individuals will often perceive HR as being a punitive kind of tool for the organization when it shouldn't be. So what you're now actually asking me is, what would be a challenge, for the businesses out there, for businesses to ensure that they have got policies that are about protecting the business, but also about protecting the employees. And that is why, if you look now, a lot of the organizations that one gets to work with have really stepped up when it comes to their, let's call it, cultural values, even in organizations where they put people first. So there is already that shift. And individuals themselves, through reporting some of their dynamics and concerns, also get to influence decisions that businesses can make in future. Because we're now recognizing that there's many dynamics, and I'll give you another layer that, often again becomes a challenge that people don't want to talk about. And that is of, let's talk about individuals who are part of couples who are of the same sex. So we're now talking about, a male here who's now just had a baby, and the general thing is, no, but they're not female, so they shouldn't. And that is discrimination.
It is.
Because we are now talking about a person who still, yes, they may have had the baby through, a surrogate mother. But again, what are the entitlements? Those are the kinds of conversations that we need to be having now, because dynamics are changing. And businesses also need to change because they need that workforce, because these are our truths. So yes, we speak about biases. So we are going to have individuals who are prejudiced because one is male and they've just had a baby. Ultimately, when we speak about having a baby, the realities are the same. And again, we're going to speak about a male who has had a child through a surrogate mother, going through depression as well. And the question is, but they did not give birth to the baby, themselves.
Yeah.
And no, remember, this is about the emotive experience.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we are going to have a person who themselves, a same-sex couple of males who are going to be struggling with this kind of depression, because now they are also having to adapt and adjust to having a baby. As much as one may have wanted to have the baby, they've gone through all of the necessary processes, but there's still that element. And so that is why we need to become even more open-minded. That is why we're having this conversation, Guma. Because we're raising awareness, because we're saying to individuals out there, have these conversations, regardless of where you're at.
And it's quite difficult to have those discussions or those conversations, because it's even those we are trying by all means to debunk the stigmas around mental health. Somehow there are those stigmas that one cannot really debunk. And as you're saying, that even with the same-sex partners, even though they didn't give birth or go through the process of being pregnant, they will experience that. And that's not something some people might even have an idea of. It's kind of very important for us to have these conversations and also lay out the realities that people live in, especially in the context of South Africa, where economics, the socio-economic status is very important. The family planning, the culture is very important, because as a cultural person, there are certain rules that you shouldn't break. From being a mom to being from being a female to being a mom, to being this, to being that. You should follow strategic, or the blueprint. And if you ever go through outside of that, it's like,
it's taboo.
What did you just do?
Who does that?
Who does that? Who told you to do that? Those kind of things. And it's very fearful to even be in that space where you can talk about your experience, but also be mindful of what society has to say.
And that's the thing, Kuma. You're right. We have got what would be a collective, let's call it, sense of identity, because we occupy different roles, right? And we subscribe to what would be different ideologies. So there's the cultural element, there's the religious element, there's also the personal element, the career element, and many other things, right? I think what I'd like to just impart, before we end off is, number one, know yourself. Number two, be compassionate with yourself. Understand, number three, that your journey may not necessarily follow that blueprint that you spoke about. And that is okay. So long as it makes sense to you, be open-minded. Also have that flexibility, because earlier on, Kuma, you spoke about having had a plan that at the age of 25 or at the age of 30, this is what I need to have. And sometimes those plans will not work out according to how we had wished. And so you've got to have that flexibility and that level of patience with yourself. Another important one is support system, support. Create a network. We do not want you to be isolated. Ask as much as you can. Ask when you get to the clinic. Because someone will say, I'm using a public health facility, so I can't ask. No, you can. You would be surprised. The professionals there know how to support you. Ask. Let's move away from the stereotypes. Ask your doctor. Ask your, the midwife who's helping you. Go seek therapy. Speak to a therapist. Because we don't come into the therapy space because we are now experiencing crisis situations. We go into therapy because we just want to speak to a professional who will walk with us and work with us in understanding where we're at. So also, yes. Continue.
And also refer us to the resources that might be that might be tailored for us, very specific for us. Even if you're afraid of going to the public clinic, if you're speaking to a mental health professional, they can direct you to someone that might know more.
Absolutely. And just on that, Kuma, you're making me think as well. there may be a need for you to be speaking to a social worker,
Mm-hmm.
because we have got social workers in the community. And sometimes we may need to have a social worker because of some of the, let's call it, psychosocial, circumstances that we live under. So talk, ask. Communicate and communicate and communicate. And for you as a loved one who's seeing some of these things and you're thinking, that's my colleague, or that's my sister, that's my partner,
that's my friend.
That's my friend.
Yeah.
Approach them with compassion.
Yeah.
By the way, you don't know what they're going through. You think you know. So go and ask.
Yeah.
Go and ask how you can support them.
Yes. Yeah.
Ask, negotiate, support.
Yeah.
I think that for me just becomes a theme. It's support that goes a long way. Support that comes from different directions. I don't know. What do you think? What's your take, as we close off?
Yeah, I think so too, because I remember a movie. Yeah, it's a movie, Aquila and the Bee, where Aquila is like learning, and then her teacher says he won't be able to continue with her, and then she gets to a point whereby she feels like she's isolated, but then she has a brother who's helping her, and then I think they are in a car. Well, not in a car, but like in the bonnet of the car, and they're helping each other. And then there's another person that wants, and then he goes to the grocery store where the other grocery worker is like helping her out with the spelling, even though he himself does not know. He even like lets her look into the paper, and then she says, you're not supposed to make me look, So there is multiple help. You just have to ask. There are 1,000 billion teachers. You don't have to have that one specific one. Even the person in the taxi that you're sitting next to, you can have a conversation about that.
Absolutely.
Not in a very, outward way, but like just asking things that they might know. Don't isolate yourself.
Yes, it's the elderly lady in the community.
Exactly.
Speak to those individuals. And more than anything else, know that whatever you're feeling is normal within your story. Yes, it may not necessarily be the most functional at that point, because it prevents you from doing many other things that you're meant to be doing. Yeah. But it is okay, because you're human. Yeah. So seek that support, every step of the way.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you on the next video or in the next discussion. And we'll have different people obviously coming in, but I'd like to appreciate this opportunity to just be with you and also talk about this, not only as an employer, but like as a person who's in a profession that speaks about what we are trying to advocate for, that speaks about the sensitivity of being a woman, or having a child, or being a father that just had a child, and going through all of these things with your partner, and it's very difficult to touch on those subjects, but at least this can be a way in which we are telling people to ask. We are telling people to seek information. We're telling people to go to therapy and have a sense of vulnerability if you're not having it, to the communities that you've built. So
absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom. I think it's very important, a platform like this where we just have conversations, because the idea is we want to normalize these experiences, because many people suffer in silence.
Yes.
And this, what we're talking about, is so multi-layered. And
it is.
The many other discussions that you speak about, that you're planning to have, I think are going to be just quite key, because ultimately, as mental health practitioners, our aim, you and I and many other mental health practitioners out there, remains to destigmatize conversations about mental health and seeking mental health support, and just allowing yourself to be
you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kuma.
Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. Thank you for listening. We'll see each other on the next one. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Syked and Sound. We hope you found this conversation helpful and that it inspired you to think a little bit more about maternal mental health. If you or someone that you know is struggling with pre or postnatal depression, remember that you are not alone. At Syked, we are here to support you. To book a session with one of our experienced therapists, head over to our website or send us a message via WhatsApp. Alternatively, you can get through to us via our social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Just search for Syked and look out for the links in our descriptions. And don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more insightful conversations. Hit the follow button to stay updated with new episodes and content. And if you are watching on YouTube, be sure to click the bell icon so that you never miss an update. Take care of yourselves, stay connected, and we'll see you in the next episode. Until then, remember, you matter, and it is okay to ask for help.